All right, why don't we go ahead and start. Thank you for joining our monthly webinar series. Today's topic is going to be about implementing project management oversight in OpenAir. We've had a variety of iterations of this type of webinar, but the focus I've taken today is really tips to help you get data out of OpenAir and be able to understand what's happening with your project. But proceeding on with what we're going to be talking about today with project management, there were three things that we advertised in this particular version of the webinar. One was, how do you just look at data? What do you have available in the system, already available to you right now? And what is standard functionality in the tool that would help you be aware of the fact that you could be approaching your budget imminently, so to speak, so standard alerts. And then what are some reports that I typically run into or we typically run into that are a benefit to project managers? What are things that help you manage your project better? What are ways to look at that data in a different format, including dashboards, graphs, things like that? Okay. And then we'll wrap up. We'll just touch on the Newsfeed feature. Those of you who are not familiar with this, so you'll get an introduction to what the feature is, and then to give you some sort of, ideas that you could bring to your teams to say, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we could do X? And some ideas that we've come up with or we've actually seen customers ask from us that we feel would be a benefit for other customers as well in using the Newsfeed feature. Okay. So without further ado, we'll just jump into the in-system visuals. So I'm going to start with one that everyone's probably familiar with, but you may not realize how much information can actually be given to you at this high level. And this is the list view, project level list view. When I say list view, what I'm doing is I'm going into the projects module, I'm looking at the projects tab, and I'm literally looking at a list of projects in a certain stage, for example, or I'm looking at a list of projects across my stages and then filtering it using the column filters in ways like who's, just my projects for me as a project owner or maybe a certain customer and so forth. Okay. The reason I'm starting with this, even though it's very basic and everyone's seen it at least once in their life if you've gone into the projects module, is I think people forget how much information insight you can just get at a quick glance looking at this. So often we're diving into the project, we're dealing with the task level, we're running billing, we're running reports, and just taking a stop to smell the roses, so to speak. At this high level, there's still a good amount of information for you as a project manager. So taking a look at what you're seeing here, I've specifically focused on hours and money fields for this discussion, and these are all available that you can customize your list view for in the system. So the first thing I'm going to highlight is planned. So planned is your budget of hours that is rolled up across your tasks. So if you have multiple tasks, you have planned hours per task, or you may have planned hours per person per task. All of that rolls up. So at a high level, you know what your budget of hours is for the project. There's another field that I didn't include in this screenshot, but it's actually the budget hours field on the project properties page. And you could add that additionally into this column list so you can see, did you plan out all the hours that are budgeted from a contract perspective, or where are you at from that? Okay. To complement the planned is booked. So booked is really useful if you are using the resource module to schedule your team. So you're using bookings, or you may have renamed them to schedulings or allocations or assignments or something. But these are the hours that you're scheduling people to do the work. So at a high level, even in this view, you want to kind of do a check to make sure, are you scheduling people for more hours than you even have a budget for or have planned for. And that gives you a very high-level view from am I planning out resources? Am I planning to go over budget just simply by the number of hours I've scheduled? Okay, so even just these two fields are useful. Now, I hear somebody on the speaker. The next column that I'm going to highlight is where we start pulling information from other modules besides obviously I mentioned the resource module, but the timesheet module. This is where you want to see what people are actually delivering, and as they actually deliver the work, you want to understand, do I have to adjust my plan at all? And in this view, the worked hours is any hour on any timesheet. That does include rejected timesheets. but any hour on any timesheet, so you kind of get a sense for what's currently, what's currently delivered according to what OpenAir is recording, and that, of course, gives you a view to compare with the planned hours, which is, similar to a budget. So where am I at from a budget perspective? And in case you're wondering, you don't have to do the math yourself. There's actually a column called gap. Gap is defined to be planned minus worked. So if you just look at the gap, you'll see what the budget remaining is at a high level again for that project. And then the approved column, of course, are the same time entries, but only the ones that are approved. And that approved column typically, well, it does contribute to your percent complete calculation. Your percent complete calculation, there's a couple of different iterations out there, features, depending on what your denominator is, but that percent complete is dependent on the approved hours in the system. So even then, just looking at this at a high level, I can tell what projects are on track or off track, but again, this is a high level, and on top of that, there's a budget option available. So budget money, we've had various webinars on budgets, budget money, how to track the budgets and break it down into pieces. So this would be a roll-up of all the funding that's available for this project. And if you're not aware, there's a field called income versus budget. So if you are doing the invoicing or project billing in OpenAir, if you use this income versus budget, it's going to compare your invoiced amounts to your budget to see what your remaining money amount is left. So it's not obvious that it's remaining budget, but that's essentially what it comes out to be if you're using the invoicing. Okay. Now this is just at the project level. Now, of course, that can be deceiving because tasks underneath the covers could be all out of whack, right? So if you go into the task level of a project and you look at your task level, you can essentially do the same kind of list view and see a lot of information, but now you've broken it down to the next level below. You still have your hours, your planned, your worked, your approved, your gap, but now it's broken down to the individual task levels, so you can see how you're doing against the budget for those. And you can bring booked in here if you are booking to the task level. Not everyone does bookings to the task level, but if you are, you can bring booked into this list view as well. The important thing here is that you're not only seeing the breakdown at the task level, but you do actually get to see what your plan is by person if you are tracking assignments with planned hours per person. So that's another feature functionality to break it down into a lower level. But even at this outline level, or this list view level, if you're tracking the information down to the individual budget per person, there's actually another view that gives you yet another breakdown of data. Because even in this view that I'm showing you on this recommendations implementation task, there's a total planned hours of 124 hours, and 95 have been delivered and approved. So it looks like we've got plenty of budget. But if I now flip the task level view to look at this outline feature, this is one of the newer outline features in OpenAir. And you can turn on, there's a couple of switches I mentioned here to get to this view, but there's a to see your assigned hour breakdown by person if you're using that functionality, and it carries it all the way through the different hour fields. So even though for the recommendation implementation task, it looked like we were fine with budget, you'll notice that the hours that I gave myself, I've run out of my budget. There are other people that I gave hours to that they are under budget currently. So this gives me a proactive way of looking at, hey, I need to shuffle hours around, or I may be proactively understanding that I'm going to run out of budget on this project. So I need to start talking to the customer now. So this is all different ways. These are all standard ways. They're not reports. You literally just change the way you want your columns look and the information comes in. And there are a couple of switches like I mentioned here. The Enable User Level Outline View gives you that breakdown per person if you're using assigned hours per person on the tasks. Okay. Now, those are the standard views in the system, and those for some projects may be just adequate for you to be able to do your project management and your insights. There's also an hours remaining feature. I didn't cover that in here. We tend to cover it with some of the timesheet webinars and stuff, and we've got some previous webinars on that. But the hours remaining feature is a whole other control with the timesheets, and that does give you information as well, more of an ETC, EAC type of view. But I just wanted to focus on the basics here for the insights. Now, from a budget plan versus actuals, looking at the roll-up at the project level, roll-up to the task level, roll-up per person on the task level, it's still a roll-up. And you're wanting maybe to look at information trending over a time frame. So if you haven't joined our webinar from last month, it was the project budget feature. And the project budget feature gives you the ability to sort of plan out cost and or hours across a time frame, and then by simply clicking on an actuals link, be able to bring the actuals for comparison against your plan. So it gives you another way to approach the plan versus actual, but the benefit of this feature is it gives you a timeline to look at sort of burn along the way. How good or bad am I doing against what my plan is? And of course, there's report versions of all of these data views, but I'm trying to focus on what can I do by just clicking on a tab and looking at the data without having to run a report. Okay. Now, along the lines of the standard visuals in the system, there is also a standard budget alert in the system. Now, this standard budget alert, you have to have role-based permission to get to it. If you're an administrator, of course, you have access to it. But the project budget alert here is something that you can schedule to run every day and have it focus on whether it's time-based or whether it's billing-based. So you're dealing with budgets or hours in general. And the budget alert will, one second. The budget alert feature gives you the ability to get an email from OpenAir when you're close to your budget. Now, the challenge with this feature, though, is it's dealing with approved hours. So as you're getting time entered on your timesheet, you're not getting that proactive, hey, somebody's recorded 2 more hours over their budget. So there's a way that you can actually, we've written scripts where we can actually have what I like to call the proactive budget alert, where it's looking at more things that are in progress, you know, worked hours, maybe you're scheduling people to do more than what you have planned for budgets, and then the system would email you to say, hey, you've scheduled more hours than you have available, or hey, you know, there's too many worked hours on this project, and that gives you more proactive, more upfront notice that something is happening on the project versus the standard budget alert, which is focused on the fact that time has already been approved or billing has already been generated along the way. So something to think about there to complement what standard is available in the system. Now, from a dashboard and reports perspective, as many of you have worked with me in the past, I do like reports in OpenAir and dashboard graphs in OpenAir, so I always look at ways of how can I provide the information or display the information that's going to be extremely easy to consume and understand what's going on. This report that I'm showing you is a basic plan versus actual report that I typically recommend to customers, where we're dealing with the hours that are assigned to people, the hours that are scheduled so people can see whether they're overscheduled or underscheduled from their budget, and then where are they at from a timesheet perspective. So how many hours have they worked versus their schedule versus their budget. So you get that all three axes, so to speak, of the graph. The last column, some people I know are not familiar with this term, but it's actually a way of looking at sort of where am I going to end up from my budget? How many hours do I expect to burn? And this booked hours versus actual, how it works is when you run the report, it pulls all the timesheet hours up to today, and then it pulls all the bookings from today forward. So it adds those together, and it gives you sort of a refined number based on where you're at from a burn perspective. The challenge with some customers using this is that people are not daily timesheet compliant. You know, timesheets, trying to make sure people get them on a weekly basis or by the end of the month is sometimes a challenge. So this reporting value tends to be maybe not as useful for some customers, so they'll use custom calculations to mimic a similar version, but it's a little bit more lenient on the timesheet compliance piece of it, okay? But either way, by looking at it from an hours view like this, You can look at it from a project and user view, like I have in this screenshot. You can add the task in there, so you get project and task, or task and user, just different ways. I like to try to keep the reports simple, so you'll be able to interpret the data very quickly and be able to understand where to take action if you need to adjust your plan or approach a customer with the effect that you may be running out of budget. Okay. Well, and I just talked about each of these values. Now, the other thing about reports is really the time frame to consider. So in this previous report, you just saw a bunch of numbers, but I'm not telling you what time frame this is. This could be current month. This could be the entire project. This could be, you know, from the beginning of time to today. Those are all different ways of interpreting data to understand whether you're on track or not. So that's going to be an important way. You may have one report, but you may have 3 different versions of that report because the data is very important, but it's better to see it in the context of trending versus snapshot. So the report, actually, spoiler alert, the report that I just showed you on the previous slide is an entire project report. And what that means is I'm taking this yearly ITD, which is inception to date, and I'm saying it's going to end next year. So I'm pulling in everything from next year backwards to the beginning of the project. And by doing that, I'm getting, you know, the actuals of time, of course, but I'm getting all the booked hours. I'm getting all the assigned hours of the planned. And then the booked with actuals is showing me where am I going to end up based on my burn so far, because it's pulling in all the timesheets, then it's adding my future bookings, and that's going to give me my ending number, and I can use that ending number to compare to my plan to see if I'm planning to go over budget. Okay. So I said all that while not showing anything on the screen. So if you look at this screen right now is showing you total projects. You can see that for this business consulting project, I have 24 hours budgeted, but the way that I'm burning it right now based on my current schedule, I'm going to end up burning 26. So is that 2 hours overage something that I should be concerned about? Is the customer okay with that? Of course, if it's something more drastic like the 60 and I'm going 15 over, that may be something you have to have a conversation with the customer about. Okay. So that's one way of looking at the data, and really the timing of that, this type of report is really good for that booked with actuals reporting value because that gives me my where am I going to end up at the end of this project type report. Okay. The other one that I see quite often, this is a snapshot, sort of where am I at right now, and that it would typically be a yearly ITD as well, ending today. So give me whatever is available in the system, but I just want to see up to today, like how much have I burned as of today and what did I plan to burn up to today. So it's a different way of looking at the data. I don't know where I am going to end up, but it gives me am I on track for what I planned at this point in time. And then the final one is a trending way of looking at the data. So do you want to look at things week over week? I mean, did you expect 40 hours last week and you only got 10? So does that mean you have 30 budget left over to use somewhere else? So using a trending graph, whether it's a report which is weekly or monthly, gives you another way to look at the data to see how hot or cold you're burning, and it could be at the user level to understand whether people are burning hot or burning cold, or another way to check timesheet compliance, right, to make sure people are getting their timesheets in. So the reporting in OpenAir, it's not so much what report to use, it's what information do you need and the different time frames that you can layer on top of it to interpret the data the way you need to make decisions about your plan for the project. Now, another report that I like to recommend to customers besides an hours-focused report is if you are tracking cost. Okay, not everyone tracks cost, so not everyone can do a margin report. But thinking along the same lines of where am I at today and where am I going to go, you can actually factor margin in as a reporting value, one that you control with custom calculations. And this report, I basically took the previous report, which is a total project report, and I provided 2 margin reporting values in there. One margin reporting value is current margin, and the second one, which is total margin, that is if I keep going the way I plan, this is where I'm going to end up. Okay, so it gives you current margin percentage and a projected ending margin percentage. And some of you on the phone, or you may have in your organization, the PMs are held responsible for maintaining a margin percent based on how the order was booked or how it was originally planned. This type of report gives them the ability to not only focus on the budget of hours, but also to be understanding the cost that they're spending and where are they at from a margin perspective. Because this can factor in things like expenses, where the expenses are a cost that you have to factor in, but there's no such thing as hours, for example. So I like to recommend this margin and forecasted margin report because it again, interprets the data slightly differently because you are focused on total cost of the project versus just the hours that are being burned. Okay. Now, I'm a very visual person, and seeing numbers is one thing, especially in the percentages on margin, 47%, 37%, something like that. But for me to be able to consume the data very quickly across multiple projects, I like to create dashboards. So a couple of dashboards that I would layer on top of the reports that I've just talked about are things like a margin report, where it shows a comparison of my current margin and my end margin. And if I had a planned margin field, I could add that into the report as well. So here I'm just saying, there's a couple of projects that look like my margins are going to go up and a couple of projects where my margin is going to go down. And as a project manager, I can take a look and understand why that's happening at a user level or an expense level to see if I need to make adjustments. Right? But from a simple hours perspective, of course, there's the plan versus actual graphs. You have your things like your person or project graph, or how many hours did you plan and how many hours are coming in on timesheets. Am I way off from my plan? If you are, then you need to take some kind of action. Do I need to adjust schedules? Do I need to adjust budgets? All of those types of graphs. This is graphical, so I know where to focus my time on. Instead of having to go person by person, I can look at individuals that seem to be way off from my original schedule. Or if you're looking at sort of just the burn of hours, looking at a graph that says how many hours did I plan versus how many hours did I book, either cumulative or over time, so you can see where, are you generally following the pattern, or are you way skewed off, like an entire month went by and you didn't do any work, and of course, now you need to catch up, okay? All of this is very objective data coming from OpenAir to complement where you as a project manager are trying to understand, okay, how much of the work has actually physically been delivered, like the development of a report or the installation of software. Those tasks completion gives you the ability to say, well, how much budget do I have left versus how much work has been done, so I can understand where I'm going to go from a budget perspective. Okay. Now, these dashboards are something, if you haven't used the dashboards too much, the dashboards live in two places in OpenAir. The first place that they live is actually in the dashboard module, which is in the Top Step system, it's called dashboard, but in many of yours it's called the home module. And there's a tab called dashboard, and this is where you have a lot of, you can put your dashboards in place, and you have to basically point it to a report. So you always have to start with a report. Okay. But another place that they can live is actually inside a project and on the dashboard tab itself. And this dashboard tab gives you the ability to create a graph on top of any of the reports that are available in the project dashboard. You do have to create these yourself. You can't populate it automatically or push them across your projects. But for some of your longer projects, it may be worthwhile to throw a graph inside your project so that you can see things quickly without having to navigate all around. The home module dashboard is useful when you have to deal with across projects, okay, or across people, things like that. And finally, the Newsfeed feature. So the Newsfeed feature, if you're not familiar with it, it got rolled out a couple of years ago, and it adds this other little icon next to the name of a project. And when you click on it, it gives you basically a newsfeed, kind of like, a Facebook entry or, post type thing. So what you do is you click the plus button to create an entry. You type in whatever you want that entry to be, And so I think I have this up in my sandbox here. You type whatever you want the entry to be. It's got some formatting. It's got a few little emojis that you can use. And it's got a status field here to track like the different stages. These are all standard with the feature. Right now you can't customize the statuses. And then when you're done with that, you save and publish it, and you would have this information here. Now, when this feature came out, it was very limited because you have to actually navigate to the project, click on the newsfeed to be able to read everything that's in it. But the good news is what has been enhanced on this feature is the ability for scripting to grab hold of the entries in the newsfeed. And the latest release of scripting in April opened up the ability for OpenAir to send information to another system. So now it's very, very feasible to have a scripting solution that would email out to like the project team that a new entry was published, or if you use something like Slack, that you could publish a newsfeed entry into a Slack channel so that there's information. You can get pieces or parse the information so that you could use a certain emoji to publish to certain channels, for example. Now there's a much more wider application use for the newsfeed feature. So they continue to enhance the scripting function, so certainly feel free to contact us if you'd like to talk to us about, hey, could it do this, could we do that, because this is just now something that I think is really good to start embracing is the newsfeed feature, because you can communicate out from OpenAir versus having to do in OpenAir only. So as we summarize what I've shown so far, just don't forget that there's a lot of information in those standard data views, and the standard data views do allow you to sort of drill down from a project level to a task level to a user level in the tool itself without having to do any kind of reporting or any kind of scripting or anything like that. That comes natively with the system. But reports are important, and reports give you the ability to see information in different ways: graphical, numerical, point in time, total view, monthly time period type thing for trending. Those are all options, so I fully expect that one report is not going to solve all your problems. You'll want versions of the same report in different ways so that you can see the data information. Right? And consider what you need OpenAir to reach out to you for. Now, OpenAir certainly sends a lot of emails, and that's another whole webinar we can do on, kind of communication plan and going through what emails are important, what emails are not important. But things that help a PM sort of not have to be proactive and like studying spreadsheets and stuff to make their life a little bit easier is if you could have somebody like OpenAir say, hey, by the way, you're within 80% of your budget, like you wanted me to remind you. It's kind of like one of those friendly reminders, like your Outlook or Google Calendar reminders that say, hey, you got a meeting in 15 minutes type thing. So those are all useful emails, I think, and those can all be something that you can customize as far as the logic behind it with some scripting solutions, right? So really the moral of the story in this tips webinar is, don't be surprised. You're a project manager. Your job is to project what will happen, to understand and avoid risks. So we certainly want to help you be proactive and be prepared as you continue forward moving, managing your projects. Okay. So with that, we're coming to the end of the webinar. Thank you for coming to the webinar. For those of you who have questions, we are going to stop the recording, and we will be answering the questions as you post them into, there's a Q&A thing.